From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. We begin with the latest news from Bolivia. President Evo Morales, who was deposed in a coup d'etat on Sunday, is on his way to Mexico after being granted political asylum. The Mexican foreign minister made the announcement on Monday.
A few moments ago, we received a call from President Evo Morales in which he responded to our invitation and applied for political asylum in our country. Mexico's foreign ministry, with the agreement of the Interior Ministry, through the minister Olga Sánchez Cordero, has decided to grant political asylum to Evo Morales for humanitarian reasons and in virtue of the situation of emergency that Bolivia is facing and where his life and integrity is currently at risk.
Our correspondent in Mexico City, Eduardo Martinez, has the details.
Indeed, the Mexican Foreign Minister, Marcelo Ebrard, has just said that he has been in contact with President Evo Morales, who has requested asylum to ensure his safety. The doctrine that Mexico has defended and practiced for so many years allows it to grant asylum to political figures who request it. In this case, the Foreign Minister said he would be sending the request to the Mexican Senate, which controls Mexico's foreign policy, and which would process the safe conduct to protect the physical safety of Evo Morales, who will then be arriving in Mexico City once all the paperwork is ready. In the morning, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has referred to the coup d'etat in Bolivia. He said that the Organization of American States must not remain silent about what happened. And Foreign Minister Ebrard then made clear that Mexico would continue to recognize Evo Morales as president until the end of his mandate, because Mexico could not recognize any government that was not the result of elections or other democratic processes. They also would not recognize any type of military government. So the foreign minister says it will give more details later about Evo Morales' arrival in Mexico.
That was Eduardo Martinez from Mexico. President Evo Morales left an audio recording for his supporters before leaving for Mexico, thanking them for all of their work and promising to return to continue the fight for a better Bolivia.
From the moment I arrived at the Tropic of Cochabamba, after the coup, my friends from the local unions accompanied me. They protected me, and now I say goodbye, thanking them for their commitment and their effort. Once a union leader, momentarily president, now once again a leader. I thank everyone for protecting me. You never abandoned me, and we will never abandon you. I will be back soon, with more energy, to continue working for our homeland. Almost 14 years of working for our people, for various social sectors. I want to thank them too. It hurts to leave for political reasons, but I will always remain alert. The Bolivian people can be sure that at any moment we will be back to continue supporting with ideas, with opinions, but always supporting the next generations. I thank the people for being by my side, for working together for a new Bolivia. Imagine so many weeks of protests and there were no killings by the police. But the day after the coup, there are many dead. I asked Camacho and Mesa, stop killing. Like in the past, defend life, stop the massacre, stop humiliating our people. In my years as president, I never asked the armed forces to repress our people. I never asked them to declare a state of siege. The future generations will judge them. I ask our armed forces to not stain themselves with our people's blood.
And Bolivia is in a state of limbo after the coup, with a complete absence of government. The police have launched a new wave of repression in poor neighborhoods as well. Citizens mobilized to reject the coup in El Alto and other communities around La Paz. There are reports of 2 people being killed and others injured. Meanwhile, the Vice President of the Senate, Janine Áñez, of the opposition, arrived in La Paz under military escort to convene an extraordinary session of the Legislative Assembly. The body needs to accept formally the president's resignation and nominate a new president, but the session was suspended. A number of supporters of Evo Morales, including mayors and members of the Electoral Court, have been detained. And also, Áñez asked the commander-in-chief of the armed forces in Bolivia to deploy the army against supporters of President Evo Morales, who remain on the streets.
The police chief has asked you to send the army to the streets to help the police. In accordance with the Constitution, we call on you to coordinate with the police. We don't want people to die. If someone dies during these operations, it will be the responsibility of the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, because he has been avoiding the coordinate with the police. I beg of you, as a Bolivian, serve your country. We don't want bloodshed. You will be responsible for what happens in Bolivia if you don't listen to our calls.
Leaders of Bolivia's main campesino movement, the CSU-TCB, declared that it is in a state of emergency in order to reject the right-wing coup.
They have massacred the Bolivian people before, and now they are massacring the people again. We say stop. The CSU-TCB today declares itself in a state of emergency, in a nationwide blockade. We have been peaceful. We have sought dialogue and unity. We have always been cautious, but now the glass has overflowed. So we communicate to all our regional organizations throughout the country that we are taking the measures that are needed. We have taken part in blockades, marches, hunger strikes, and other protests. We have brought down governments and dictators. Our regional organizations will select their strategic points, and we will mobilize everywhere.
So let's take a closer look at the events that led to a political crisis, violence by the right-wing groups, and it ended in Sunday's coup.
Fires set inside electoral courts and other attacks against public institutions were the first phase of the coup in Bolivia, a situation that began after opposition groups decided to reject the results of October's general elections. Opposition violence in the streets did not cease. Destruction, road blockades, and armed protesters multiplied in different cities of the country. Despite growing violence, opposition leaders continued to call for mobilization, not willing to wait for the results of an audit of the vote count. At the same time, aggressions against government supporters and the leaders of the movement towards Socialism Party were on the rise. They were being subjected to kidnappings, torture, and public humiliation.
I am in the side of the truth. I am not afraid to tell the truth. I am in a free country and I will not stay quiet. If they want to kill me, go ahead, kill me. As I said one day, I will give my life for this process of change.
In line with these destabilizing plans, different media outlets were taken over by opposition groups, trying to prevent them from doing their work. The attacks became more and more personal and reached the homes of ministers and people close to the government. As a result of this terrorism and of threats against their lives and their families, senior government officials were forced to submit to resignations.
Governors, mayors, and some senators resigned to save their families. What are they being told? If you quit or speak against Evo, we will respect your family. Now I have resigned. We have resigned. I don't want to see families abused under the instruction of Mesa and Camacho.
The resignation of President Evo Morales marks the last phase of a coup which had as a main tool extreme violence.
After this short break, we'll take a look at more international reactions to the coup in Bolivia. Stay with us.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has said U.S. President Donald Trump is responsible for the coup against the Bolivian president.
The
concentration at Puente Llaguno was impressive. I was watching it on television while I was in a meeting. This was called yesterday at 9 o'clock at night. Today, the people of Caracas organized and mobilized to Puente Llaguno to reject the coup in Bolivia, the imperialist coup that Donald Trump financed, organized, and directed against our brother, Evo Morales. Puente Llaguno is a very powerful symbol because it was where the coup took place on April 11, 2002.
In Venezuela, members of social movements and political activists gather in Caracas to express their support for President Morales and reject interference from the United States.
Resist, people in Bolivia, resist. And if they think that they might come and do the same thing they did in Bolivia, they are wrong. Any fire they set is a fire that we will put out.
Argentina's president-elect Alberto Fernández rejected the coup in Bolivia and expressed his gratitude to the government of Mexico for supporting the Bolivian president.
In Bolivia, democracy was interrupted and then things were done in such a way that they were unable to stop a social crisis and a huge confrontation, thanks to the solidarity that exists from Latin American countries who went to the aid of the victim, Evo Morales. As such, I want to make a first reflection. We have to have enormous gratitude with President López Obrador, who was generous and quick to help because, in the end, we are in all Latin American. He also allowed for dozens of Bolivians who were being persecuted to take refuge in the Mexican embassy. We are eternally grateful to President López Obrador.
Hundreds of citizens in Argentina demonstrated on the streets in support of President Evo Morales.
We stand in support of Bolivia and repudiate our government that has not dared to utter the word coup when there was an intervention by the armed forces. It is a shame our government refuses to condemn a coup d'etat in a bordering country. That is a very serious and cannot be tolerated. We demand that the outgoing president speak in a way that corresponds to the Democratic Charter and Mercosur and to the international accords signed.
Now to the United States, where demonstrators gather outside the OAS headquarters in Washington, D.C., just across the street from the White House. The Organization of American States, which monitored Bolivia's elections, had called for the results to be annulled while questioning the validity of Morales' victory. Those taking part in the solidarity action led by advocacy groups like Code Pink, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and Answer Coalition are condemning the OAS as a dangerous institutional arm of the U.S. neoliberal foreign policy. Protesters are therefore calling on the international body to retract what they say are its misleading claims. In other news from Latin America, workers in Chile have begun a strike as protests against the government of President Sebastián Piñera entered day 26. Demonstrators are calling for a constituent assembly to create a new constitution and replace the current one, written in the era of the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. They are also calling for an end to the repression of protests, which has seen 2,009 people injured as of this week, according to the National Human Rights Institute. Of those, 197 were eye injuries, a figure which has sparked outrage and allegations of intentional police malpractice. The strike is supported by the country's major workers' organizations, including the Miners' Union, the Union of Shop Workers, and the Dockers' Union.
Union organizations in Valparaíso, the Customs Union, the Dockers, we're all going on strike. Chile will be paralyzed. We're all joining the strike on November 12th. We'll be at Plaza Sotomayor in Valparaíso. We won't tire. We are united, and we want a new constituent assembly.
But workers in Chile have rejected the government's announcement that it is willing to change the constitution because it doesn't plan for a constituent assembly. They argue that citizens must participate in the process rather than just the ruling elite. Our correspondent, Leonel Retamal, has the details.
Social movements, representative of different sectors of the city, health workers, retirees, students and labor unions marched around the headquarters of former Congress in Santiago to demand the creation of a constituent assembly. This was a moment when the Constitution Commission was in session, as the government was trying to explain its proposal announced the day before of a constituent Congress, which no one has much clarity of what it truly means. There are even different versions between spokespeople and government representatives who were unable to explain in this commission exactly what the idea is. Social movements say that to solve and move forward with the changes that are needed, the Constitution must be drafted and the mechanism has to be a constituent assembly to give participation to all citizens. Demonstrations took place all day in downtown Santiago, and they were eventually repressed by the Special Police Task Force, as usual. This marked the 25th uninterrupted day of mobilizations, which at times have surpassed 2 or 3 million people, according to some reports. But repression has also continued, as there are now a record number of citizens who have lost an eye due to the police brutality.
Our correspondent Daniel Retamal from Chile. And still to come, we take an in-depth look at the Ebola health emergency in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We'll be back.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomum. Monday, only on Telesur.
Thank you for joining us again. Protests are continuing in Haiti as the opposition called for mass demonstrations across the country on Sunday. The unrest started in July 2018 as Haitians demanded the resignation of President Jovenel Moïse, whom they accuse of leading a corrupt government. The Caribbean nation also has high inflation and fuel shortages, and the police have violently repressed demonstrators using tear gas and rubber bullets. Some retaliated by throwing stones and setting vehicles, debris and other objects on fire. At least 20 people have been killed and 200 injured in the past 5 weeks of protests. The International Conference on Population and Development is set to begin in Kenya. World leaders, representatives of non-governmental organizations, young people, business and religious leaders as well will convene in Nairobi for the summit. The conference will take place between November 12th and 14th and is a follow-up meeting set to fast-track the commitment made in Cairo in 1994 when it was last convened.
I am proud of the leading role that Kenya is taking on this critical issue for the future of humanity. And I close by asking fellow Kenyans, Africans and citizens of the world to stand tall and stand up for the rights and choices of women and girls across the world.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, a local radio station involved in the efforts to stop the spread of Ebola has closed down after one of its journalists was murdered. Radio presenter Papi Mumbere Mahamba was killed in his home after hosting an Ebola awareness program last week. Now, staff at Lewemba Radio in the eastern town of Mombasa say they have received numerous threats and have stopped the broadcasting to safeguard their lives. Local fears and superstitions have led to attacks on those involved in the awareness campaign against the epidemic, undermining the efforts to stop the virus from spreading. Nearly 2,200 people have died from the Ebola virus since the outbreak began last year. And now let's take a deeper look at the health emergency in the DRC.
Investigating the most recent resistance of the Ebola virus is an opportunity to end the danger posed by the epidemic and start building for tomorrow. After being discharged, Little Muhindo parades in Biakato mines so that everyone gets involved in ending the Ebola outbreak.
There is medicine. There is a vaccine.
The child was burning up, but instead of following the behavior of the Mupanda neighborhood, I decided to go to the Mangina treatment center. And we heal. If you feel sick, you should go to the doctor.
This is one of the affected neighborhoods where rumors circulate against response teams. But today, the neighborhood is recovering a survivor and consolidating its involvement in the fight against the virus. The coordination of follow-up treatments, communications, vaccinations, disinfecting, psychosocial support and security are done in the fort of Biakato. Since mid-September, after a new wave of the epidemic hit, their work has advanced slowly because of indeterminate accusations and threats against the security of the teams.
When we go to the field, people don't want us there. They ignore the nature of the epidemic. They believe that the response teams bring the disease.
This mother shows up today at the Transit and Isolation Center. She was in contact with 2 children who had the virus and was vaccinated on the 16th. On the 19th, she became ill and escaped to a place where response teams don't arrive. But she's returned. The laboratory confirms that she is ill with Ebola. She will be moved to the Maninga treatment center, 2 hours away by motorcycle. She's helped by 2 people who have been cured of the disease.
We studied Ebola in college.
When those who have made contact with someone with a confirmed case are identified, a vaccination team goes to the affected home.
If you reject the vaccine, you will see a lot of people will get ill and will start spreading the disease.
Those who take the vaccine get ill. Why do you want us to obey you?
He is white. He is not stupid enough to come here to receive death.
The vaccine doesn't work against those who have the virus in incubation. Immunization cannot start until 10 days have passed, according to studies.
They are afraid to die because they have seen a lot of people who have gone to the hospital and died.
The development of community assemblies is breaking down barriers and putting on the table issues that have so far hindered healing.
People say that each agent receives $20,000 to come here.
Humanitarian principles are not respected by agents working on the epidemic response. When a family resists, they are told that their doors will be closed and they will die.
Moms who agree to go to the treatment center don't come out of there.
The whole community has been affected by the virus and suffers the loss of many. This is one of the health centers preferred by the population. The government and their partners have made improvements here, but hundreds of other centers just like this still hope to help with the lives of farmers. It is the obligation of communities to end the epidemic by appropriating prevention measures. But the government also has an obligation, and that is to use millions of dollars that come in to fund the Ebola response in order to strengthen the national healthcare system. They were willing to receive the vaccine today, but have just learned that their mother died at the treatment center. They are now orphans. The quarantine continues, but now they are aware of the danger that gives them a decisive principle to fight against Ebola.
So let's continue with news. Beijing has called on the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to stop his incessant anti-China rhetoric after his comments against the country during the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Pompeo accused China of using tactics and methods to suppress its own people that would be horrifyingly familiar to former East Germans.
The U.S. attempts to use the United Nations platform to make baseless criticism of China and even meddle in China's international affairs under the pretext of religious freedom. This goes against the objectives and principles of the United Nations character and goes against the basic norms of international relations. It is doomed to fail and will certainly be met with opposition from the international community.
And our last story, thousands of people in Palestine have attended the funeral of the Islamic struggle commander who was killed in an Israeli attack on Tuesday morning. Baha Abu al-Atta was killed alongside his wife when Israeli military planes targeted his home in the occupied Gaza Strip. Several civilians were also injured during the attack. Another Israeli attack reportedly targeting a senior Palestinian official in the Syrian capital Damascus left 2 people dead and at least 6 others with serious injuries. And with that, we end our news brief, but remember, you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
Una travesía para descubrirnos. Buscamos conexión.